You know that knot in your stomach, the racing thoughts, the hesitation that creeps in right before you do something important.
Yeah, that's fear.
That's anxiety. And here's the truth, there is nothing wrong with you for feeling it. Every single one of us does. But here's the catch. Fear isn't the problem. The problem is how long you let it sit in the driver's seat. The more time you give it, the more power it has. And before you know it, you're stuck overthinking, convincing yourself you're not ready, and watching opportunities slip right by. The good news? You don't need some complicated strategy to stop it. You don't need years of training or endless waiting or permission from anyone else. All you need is one simple, powerful way to interrupt fear before it takes over. And when you do, everything changes: your confidence, your energy, your ability to take action. Because the secret to stopping fear and anxiety isn't about eliminating them. It's about taking control the moment they show up. Fear and anxiety are not signs of weakness. They're part of being human. That sentence sounds simple, but it's one of the most freeing things you can tell yourself. When the stomach drops, the mind races, and your chest tightens. We were built to respond to danger. Our bodies flash red lights and send us signals, because thousands of years ago those signals kept us alive. Today, those same ancient systems show up for deadlines, breakups, interviews, and the tiny everyday risks of being seen. They aren't a moral failing or proof that you're secretly broken. They're an automatic system doing what it was designed to do: protect you from perceived threat. The mistake we make is believing the message is about us as people instead of about a momentary state our nervous system is experiencing. When the physical sensations show up, the sweaty palms, the buzzing thoughts, the urge to withdraw, it feels personal. We interpret that energy as evidence that we can't handle something. We tell ourselves, if I'm anxious, I must be weak. That internal translation is what keeps fear in charge. It turns a temporary physiological response into a life sentence. But the reality is that everyone has those moments. Some people perform on camera while their heart is hammering. Some people lead teams while their stomach is in knots. The difference isn't the absence of fear, it's the relationship they have with it. They don't use fear as a final verdict on their identity. Anxiety is also creative energy. Sounds strange, right? But think about what's happening. There's an activation. Attention narrows. You're more aware of possible negative outcomes. If you learn to channel that surge, name it, move with it, use it as data, you can convert it into focus instead of paralysis. That doesn't mean you'll never feel overwhelmed. It means you can stop pretending that feeling anything is shameful. When you stop labeling yourself as weak, you stop feeding the story that keeps you small. You start seeing fear as a messenger, not the enemy, not the boss, just a signal. What you do with the signal is the choice. Part of the problem is cultural. We've been fed the myth that strong people are unshakable. Movies celebrate the unflappable hero, and we internalize an impossible standard. Real strength shows up when you feel the fear and keep going anyway. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to act despite it. If you look closely at people you admire, you'll almost always find that they felt fear. Often a lot of it. Before the moment they stepped forward, they didn't wait for the fear to disappear, they acknowledged it, slowed down long enough to name it, and then took one small step. That act of moving in spite of discomfort is what rewires your confidence over time. There's also a social layer. Shame thrives in silence. If we're honest about our anxiety, we realize it's normal, and that alone reduces its power. When fear is secret, it grows. When it's spoken, it loses some of its hold. That's why the language you use matters. Calling yourself weak every time your heart races is like throwing gasoline on a small flame. Calling it anxiety or nervousness is like pointing at a weather pattern. Observable, temporary, manageable. Words don't fix everything, but they change how you treat yourself in those moments. Finally, remember that the systems inside you are not moral judges. They are ancient hardware reacting to inputs. The software, your awareness, your choices, the small actions you take, can update how you respond. You don't need to be fearless to live a meaningful life. You need the humility to accept that fear will come, and the courage to keep showing up anyway, step by imperfect step. The problem isn't that fear shows up, it's that we let it sit in the driver's seat long enough to reroute our whole day, week, or life. Think about the tiny moments when everything changes. A text pops up, you see an opportunity, you hear someone say your name for a presentation, and there's that split second, half a breath, where you can act or you can fold. That tiny window is where decisions are stolen. The longer you ruminate in that window, the more your body and brain recruit stories to justify retreat. Hesitation is the fertilizer fear loves. When you pause and let doubt talk, your mind builds a narrative. It reaches for proof that you shouldn't do the thing. What if this goes wrong? What if they laugh? What if you fail? And every what if finds a supporting memory or a hypothetical that makes staying still look like the smart, safe choice. But safety, in this sense, is illusion. The brain's job is to keep you alive, not necessarily to keep your life expanding. So it will invent reasons to avoid risk, and if you give it time, those reasons calcify into a believable identity. I'm the kind of person who doesn't do that, or I'm not the type to try. Those identities then predict and produce the future they pretend to describe. This is how habit forms. Small, repeated hesitations stack up until they become the pattern that shapes your choices without your permission. A moment of fear becomes a habit of avoidance. That habit shows up at scale, big opportunities missed, relationships never started, projects never launched. It's not that fear is permanent, it's that the small choices you make when you're afraid compound into a life that feels constrained. The math is cruel. Tiny delays, repeated over months and years, equal major losses in momentum and confidence. There's a practical piece here. Time gives fear room to recruit your imagination against you. The amygdala lights up, the body prepares for threat, and your attention narrows toward everything that could go wrong. That biological machinery is fast and persuasive. It doesn't want nuance. If you let it narrate for minutes, it will win. But if you move faster than it can script the future, you interrupt the pattern. That movement doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be a step toward the door, a short sentence into a meeting, a click that sends an email, one deep breath, and your hand on the phone. The key is the interruption. Action breaks the rehearsal loop. There's also a social economy to this. When you avoid because of fear, you're sending a message to yourself about who you are. Every time you let fear decide, you bank an identity deposit. I'm someone who backs out. Over time, those deposits compound. Conversely, every small action in spite of fear is an identity deposit in the other direction. I'm someone who tries. Identity isn't abstract. It's the aggregate of tiny actions. If you want your decisions to change what you do in the tiny moments. Practicality matters here more than insight. You can understand the mechanics all day, but understanding without shifted behavior is just elegant self-awareness. The power sits in the gap between thought and movement. So design your response to short-circuit hesitation. Make a rule for yourself that forces motion. Something so simple you can obey it even when your heart is pounding. Training your nervous system this way is like building a muscle. At first, it's awkward. At first, you'll want to argue with it. But muscle remembers faster than your mind criticizes. And remember this, the clock starts the moment fear whispers. If you let it run, it will tell a story, recruit evidence, and take up residence. If you move first, the story is changed. The decision belongs to you again, not to the anxious loop that wanted to keep you small. There are moments so small you barely notice. The half-second pause before you answer a message, the delay before you raise your hand, the breath you hold just long enough to imagine every possible disaster. Those tiny hesitations look insignificant, and very often they are the soil where anxiety grows. Each pause gives your mind space to spin stories, to find threats where there may be none, and to recruit evidence that staying frozen is the safest option. What starts as a flicker of doubt can, after repetition, become the default response your body and brain expect. Hesitation changes physiology. When you stall, your body doesn't relax, it ramps up. The longer you sit with the what-ifs, the more adrenaline and cortisol circulate, and the more the brain prioritizes danger signals over creative thinking. Instead of using your energy to act, your system conserves it for imagined threats. Over time, these reactions become what you expect in specific situations. You begin to associate context with discomfort, and your nervous system learns to anticipate distress. There's a narrative economy at work. Brains are storytellers. Given a pause, they will fill in a plot. A hesitation hands control to the storyteller, and it rarely produces kind stories. Memory and imagination combine to generate convincing arguments. You'll embarrass yourself. They won't like you. You'll fail. Those lines sound plausible when repeated, and plausibility is enough to change behavior. So the pause doesn't just feel like a moment, it becomes the seed of a belief that colors your choices long after the original situation has passed. Small hesitations invite avoidance to compound. Each time you defer action to quell discomfort, you reinforce the idea that avoidance works. Avoidance reduces short-term anxiety, but it never builds confidence, it quietly erodes it. Look for the small compromises in your day, the email you didn't send, the call you postponed, the conversation you let pass. Each seems minor until you measure them over months. The aggregate becomes a pattern that limits possibility and shrinks your sense of who you are allowed to be. The mechanics are merciless but useful because they reveal the lever. If hesitation creates the cycle, interruption breaks it. The trick is not to outthink fear, but to move first. Movement rewires expectation. A single small action, a click, a step, a sentence, sends a counter message to your body and brain: this is survivable. Repeat it and your nervous system starts to expect action, not withdrawal. The pause that once birthed anxiety becomes the trigger for motion. Notice how people you admire behaved in micro moments. They answered despite the tremor in their voice. They introduced themselves even when they feared rejection. They launched something imperfect because they chose motion over rehearsal. Those small acts aren't dramatic, they're boring and relentless. Yet that accumulation is what rewires identity. Quiet, repeated courage in tiny windows reshapes who you become. More than one-off heroics. Language matters in these moments too. If you describe a pause as, "I can't," you feed the loop. If you name it hesitation or warning, you create distance between you and the reaction. Distance gives you choice. Practice noticing micro pauses. Not to judge them, but to catch them before they grow roots every day. Make simple rules: 1 second to decide, a tiny motion to start, a habit that forces movement regardless of how you feel in that half second. When you track these tiny moments, you begin to see the pattern clearly. Small hesitations stacked like bricks build a wall. Each brick by itself is nothing, but together they become a barrier to the life you intended. Replace each pause with a tiny motion and the structure crumbles, not by a grand epiphany, but by steady, ordinary action. The secret to breaking free from fear and anxiety is not a long, fancy course or some mystical insight hidden behind 17 steps. It's simple enough that you can start today, and practical enough that it changes how your nervous system responds. Most of us expect a seismic shift, a revelation that makes the trembling go away. Instead, the real power lives in tiny, usable moves you can do in the middle of your day. Things that interrupt the automatic loop and give you back choice. Those moves don't require permission, preparation, or perfect conditions. They require intention and the willingness to act before your mind builds a case against you. Think about how decisions happen inside your body. A sensation arrives, tight chest, racing thought, and your brain immediately begins to narrate. If you wait, that narration becomes convincing. If you move, the story gets new data. Movement is the language your brain understands. A step, a sentence, a click. Those small motions tell your body, this is survivable, and that message reroutes the biology that wanted to freeze you. The trick is to make the motion so simple that it's impossible to argue with when your heart is pounding. Simple removes the argument. Simple forces an outcome. Either you act or you don't. Design rules that force motion. Don't wait for inspiration. Create a rule you can follow even when you don't feel like it. For example, speak first in a meeting, send the draft, or pick up the phone and say one sentence. Make your rules so small your anxiety can't justify disobeying it. The rule doesn't feel heroic, but that's the point. Big identity shifts happen through boring repetition, not dramatic once in a lifetime moments. Every tiny act of motion deposits evidence into your nervous system that you're someone who moves in spite of fear. Over time, those deposits outweigh the withdrawal savings that avoidance promised. Language is a tool here too. Name the feeling, that's anxiety, or that's hesitation. When you label the state, you create distance. Distance lets you decide. Stop telling yourself stories about who you are and start reporting facts about what's happening in your body. When you say, I'm anxious, you stop the narrative that says, I'm incapable. The name is not a judgment, it's data. Treat it as such and then act on that data with one small, non-negotiable behavior. You can also redirect the energy physically. Your body doesn't care whether you're scared of spiders or scared of pitching an idea, it responds to movement. Stand up, breathe in for 3 seconds, exhale, and take one step toward the thing that scares you. The physiology shifts and your attention widens from catastrophic rehearsal to simple problem solving. Use your body to change your brain, and the brain, relieved of the emergency script, starts helping you. That's practical neuroscience, not wishful thinking. Accountability accelerates everything. Tell one person you'll do one small thing and then do it. The social nudge is crude but effective. It introduces a tiny consequence that biases you toward action. Pair that with a habit trigger, a time of day or preceding action, and you build a reliable circuit that outlasts motivation. Motivation is fickle, rules are stubborn. Build rules into your environment so you don't have to rely on mood to be brave. Finally, be patient with yourself in the way you would be with someone learning to ride a bike. Early attempts wobble. You'll occasionally back down. That's not failure, it's practice. The secret isn't perfection, it's consistency. Keep the moves small, keep the language neutral, and keep showing up. Over weeks, the nervous system learns a new patterns. When fear shows up, motion follows. That pattern grows into a habit, and habits change trajectories more reliably than grand speeches or sporadic inspiration. Keep doing the tiny, practical things that interrupt the loop, and you'll notice the space around fear getting less crowded, not because the feelings vanished, but because you reclaimed the steering wheel. Change doesn't come from waiting until you feel ready. It comes the moment you decide, in a sliver of time, to interrupt fear before it has a chance to become a story that runs your life. That decision is powerful not because it's dramatic, but because it creates a new relationship between you and the feeling. Instead of letting fear accumulate like unread emails, you stop it at the first notification, you acknowledge it, you act on purpose, and you trade the slow creep of rumination for a quick, deliberate motion that rewires what your body expects next. The decision point is deceptively small. It may look like 5 seconds or 3 or even 1, the fraction of a breath between the impulse to flee and the choice to move. That fraction is where your agency lies. If you habitually let fear expand over minutes, it will gather evidence, summon worst-case scenarios, and make the decision for you. But if you practice moving in that tiny window, you teach your nervous system something radically different, that feelings are not commands, they're signals you can respond to. The more often you choose motion in that split second, the more automatic motion becomes. Practicality wins here. Don't wait for motivation to arrive like a guest. Build rules that require motion even when you don't feel brave. Pick one small, impossible to argue with action for the moments fear arrives. Send one line of an email, stand up, introduce yourself, say the first sentence. Make that action a non-negotiable. The brain argues when there's time to argue. Remove the time. Make the decision faster than the fear can manufacture reasons to avoid. Over time, these tiny choices accumulate into a muscle you can rely on when stakes get higher. There's also a mental trick. Name the experience as it happens. Saying, "That's anxiety," or "That's hesitation," creates a tiny gap between you and the reaction. That gap provides choice. It's not therapy jargon. It's tactical. Naming interrupts the automatic narrative and gives you the space to execute your short rule. Combine the name with emotion and the loop breaks. Awareness plus action changes the chemistry. You are not waiting for the feeling to pass. You are acting with the feeling present. Think about the math of momentum. When you move, even imperfectly, you produce data. The world responds. Someone replies to your email. The meeting starts. You survive. Those tiny survivals are not inconsequential. They are proof your nervous system stores. Each small action shifts the probability that the next time you will act sooner. The alternative is cumulative regret. Every avoided moment compounds into a barrier that feels bigger than it is. Movement makes the barrier porous. Accountability accelerates the learning. Tell one person you'll make one small move and then follow through. The social nudge makes the decision more likely and gives the experience external weight, paired with a habit trigger. A specific time, a preceding action, a visible cue, you transform the split-second decision into a predictable reaction. Rules beat feelings, habits outlast inspiration. Design your environment so that the correct action has the lowest friction. Be realistic about the process. This is not about becoming fearless. Feelings will still arrive. The difference is that they will no longer get to live in your decision-making chair. You will still feel the hollow in your stomach, the quick thoughts, the urge to step back. It's just that now those sensations will be met with motion, not a monologue. Motion changes physiology and attention almost instantly, turning catastrophic rehearsal into problem solving. Practice accumulates into identity. The person who decides to interrupt fear repeatedly becomes someone who takes action before the story gets long. Identity isn't bestowed by a speech or a single win. It's earned through countless tiny breaks in the pattern. Each time you choose to act in the face of hesitation, you deposit evidence into who you are becoming. The surprising part is how boring it is. Steady, ordinary moves stack into extraordinary change without fanfare.